The State of Crypto is presented by Tron, connecting the world to the power of cryptocurrency.
Sam Bankman-Fried is back in the legal hot seat. The FTX founder is getting arraigned this morning on the most recent version of his indictment. Joining us now to discuss is former federal prosecutor and partner at Bryan, Leighton, Paisner, Renato Mariotti. Welcome to the show, Renato.
Happy to be here. Thanks.
Good morning. We are happy to have you here. All right. Tell us what's going on this morning. What are you expecting to see in this arraignment?
Well, a couple things. First of all, this is going to be an interesting peek at Sam Bankman-Fried after he's been imprisoned. Remember that he was repeatedly violating his conditions of release. He had the bright idea that he was going to be trying to get his retaliation against witnesses and so on, and the judge has put him in prison. So it's going to be interesting. There should be a fight at this court appearance over his communications and with his lawyers' access to him. That has been an ongoing issue that his lawyers have been raising. They want to have more time with him to prepare for trial. They want days where he can be at their office. They want uninterrupted hours with him. And then separately, there will be, some discussion soon about jury instructions. There is, I'd say, a very traditional, typical fight here between the defendant and the government about jury instructions. Unfortunately for Mr. Bankman-Fried, he is facing a lot of counts, even without this count that has been, dismissed for now due to the extradition treaty with the Bahamas.
So obviously there's a lot we don't know right now, and the proceeding is currently ongoing. He was with his defense, lawyers for the last hour or so preparing for this arraignment. Now the arraignment is going to happen, and then he's going to go back with the defense lawyers to prepare for his defense for the next 5 hours or so, we think, depending on how long the arraignment goes on. I just want to understand, given the fact that you work for the U.S. Attorney's Office and were assigned, interestingly, to the Securities and Commodities Fraud section at the time, you charged and convicted just several violators. Is there a precedence for a person charged to be let out of jail 5 days a week, even if it is in the attorney's office, to prepare for his defense? Does that happen?
It does happen in a complex case. I do think it's fair to say that the judge is giving extra accommodation to Mr. Bankman-Fried, and it's being done because the judge does not want to try this case a second time and doesn't want to deal with issues on appeal. In other words, let's just say that the judge made a decision. Judge Kaplan said, we're going to heavily restrict the amount of time that you spend with your attorneys. What would happen is, after the trial, Mr. Bankman-Fried would challenge the verdict, claiming that he did not have adequate time to prepare, he was not properly afforded his right to counsel. And so good judges anticipate this. They only want to try the case once. They don't want to deal with lengthy appeals. And so they're accommodating to the defense pre-trial, particularly in a case like this where the evidence is overwhelming. I expect the judge thinks this is likely going to be a conviction. And it's a complex case that the judge really doesn't want to have to try more than one time.
All right. Okay. A follow-up here, because the other thing that's happening is that he's going to go with an approach. The defense is going to go with an approach which is potentially going to reveal the lawyer who gave him the advice to do what he did. That leads to this problem of a particular lawyer or lawyers who will be suddenly in the limelight if their names are allowed out, I suppose. What do you make of that? The advice of counsel defense that SPF is going to use, including the identification of the attorney. That's something that's been demanded by the U.S. attorney. That if you are going to take that, then I need to know well in advance before we go into the case, and what that could really mean, because this is he said, she said kind of thing eventually.
Yeah, regarding the advice of counsel defense, I don't know if you know that meme on the internet. It's a bold move, Cotton. Let's see if it works out for him. I think it's a very bold move. It's a sort of a Hail Mary, but it has a lot of pitfalls. One of which is that once he identifies the attorney, he is required to waive attorney-client privilege, and the government will have the opportunity to ask questions and inquire regarding his communications with that attorney. That often works against the defendant because it's rarely the case that a defendant asks for advice about committing a crime, and the lawyer, in a straightforward way, without a bunch of caveats or other legalisms, says, yes, you should go forward and commit a crime. That's a great idea. I expect when you look at those communications, they're not going to read the way that Sam Bankman-Fried wants them to read. And in my experience, when lawyers are brought on the stand, and I've been in that position when I was a federal prosecutor, cross-examining a lawyer in an advice of counsel defense, the lawyer buried the defendant. Why? Because the lawyer has his own reputation and, of course, is not going to suggest or say that in any way he was counseling someone to commit fraud.
Renato, we saw Sam Bankman-Fried out on bail at his parents' house, limited communications. Now he's being accused of tampering with witnesses. He's back behind bars. In your opinion, is his defense team doing a good job so far?
Yes, the problem with the Sam Bankman-Fried defense team is not the lawyers, it's Sam Bankman-Fried. He is really making very bad choices for himself. From his media blitz, where he was talking to everyone under the sun, essentially giving the prosecutors a free crack at him. They can use those statements against him at trial. To his vendetta against, for example, his former paramour, Miss Ellison, who will be testifying against him at trial, and his other shenanigans while he was on release. He really made a lot of bad choices, and he only has himself to blame for the predicament that he's in. I really don't blame his attorneys at all. I think, particularly given the resources, the limited resources he has, I think he has, reputable attorneys. I think the issue is Mr. Bankman-Fried himself.
Renato, I want to push back against what you said, because the bottom line is that these lawyers agreed to work with him. And when they agree to work with a particular client, you tell the client that you don't do anything I don't want you to do. And clearly, the lawyers were not either, convincing enough for SPF, or there is that alternative theory that you're putting out there that he's just, somebody who goes wild. What about that?
That's a fair point. They did agree to this. I feel a little bit, an analogy might be to Donald Trump, right, who has many lawyers who I imagine tell him to comply with rules, but he goes and does and says what he wants anyway. He's not someone who's easy for lawyers to control. Look, I represent clients across the country all the time. I've been out of the government now for several years. And I have my own share of clients who don't follow my instructions. I've represented politicians myself who will, want the limelight and answer questions from reporters and take interviews, even though I tell them this is a really bad idea while you're under criminal investigation. So I do feel his lawyer's pain and don't blame them for that. Yes, they did sign on for this. Yes, they are probably not going to get paid what they're worth, and they're going to have to deal with a client who doesn't follow their instructions. But I do think I put the blame here with the client, because I can't imagine any competent lawyer not heavily warning this client, as he was frankly warned by the judge in court, that everything he says can be used against him, and that's exactly what's going to happen.
Renato, speaking of following instructions, the DOJ and Sam Bankman-Fried have filed competing sets of jury instructions for the trial in October. Talk to us about what's going on here. Is this usual?
Yeah, it's pretty commonplace. At the end of the day, the Sam Bankman-Fried case really looks a lot like other large fraud cases. And when I was fighting large fraud cases myself, when I was a federal prosecutor, I would have big fights over jury instructions, including the one that, that there's a big fight about right now. Sam Bankman-Fried wants to include what's called a good faith instruction. Defendants often want to include a good faith instruction. And basically what the good faith instruction says is that if the defendant was acting in good faith, he did not have the intent to defraud, which is one of the elements that the government has to prove in order to prove his guilt. So it's in some, the government will argue it's repetitive, it's not necessary. The instructions already say we have to prove intent to defraud, but judges routinely give that to the defense because they want to make sure there's no issue on appeal. Same reason I mentioned regarding, why he's given time to work with his lawyers. And what I will just expect there ultimately is for the government to win, for the defense to win that fight as well.
All right. You're already in the hot seat, but I'm going to make it hotter. Here's the thing. Hypothetically, if you're given only one choice, which is that you have to predict an outcome for this case right now, and nobody's going to hold you to it because obviously this is just discussion and speculation, what would that outcome be?
Sam Bankman-Fried will be guilty on most but not all counts. In other words, the jury's facing a lot of different counts. Hard to select not guilty for everything, and the evidence is pretty damning. So I'll expect him to get to be found guilty on most counts, which, by the way, is a complete and utter defeat. The fact that he gets a not guilty on a few counts is irrelevant because he'll be guilty of many felonies and will ultimately receive a very lengthy sentence.
And lastly, Renato, I got to ask you, because we've asked almost every lawyer who's been on the show weighing in on the Sam Bankman-Fried case, and I hope that one day we'll make an epic compilation of it. What advice would you give Sam Bankman-Fried right now if you were his lawyer?
Shut up. Stop talking. Stop doing anything that your lawyers don't do. It's time to take this seriously and realize that you're not the smartest guy in the room. You never were. And it's time to follow the experts' advice and try to help them save your life.
Renato, thank you very much for joining us this morning.
Thank you.
That was Bryan Cave, Leighton Paisner partner, Renato Mariotti.